All right, this is Jack Donovan, and you are listening to or watching Pater, the Journal of Solar Culture, PH2T3R. And now I've been working all week on getting a new website for the Order of Fire up and running. The pater.com will eventually go away, and it will be orderoffire.com, which is live, and the store is live, and all that is ready to go. I'm just refining things at the moment. But tonight's show is about optimism. We were going to talk about the new their book that came out, but it came out and then Amazon put it in a phantom zone. I just remembered that from Superman. But it's in a phantom zone right now where it's $98 all of a sudden. It'll be fixed shortly. And if it isn't fixed in a week, I have a backup plan to fix it. But this is pretty normal with books as they come out. I even read up on my printer's explanation of things, and it's basically, this is Amazon's algorithm. It's all being run, magically, and it'll do what it wants to do when it wants to do it. Like boxes need it's thinking and it's doing whatever it needs to do. So, but we do have a new book that's coming out. It is out, and I'm going to make it available for more people. I ordered a box today so we can sell copies online. And when it comes out and when we're sure that you can order it, we'll do a podcast on that because Mr. Christopher Robertson, my co-host, author of Many Fighted Books, he wrote a mini book in the middle of this book. It's a 60-page essay on solar phenomenology and various other things, and putting solar ideals in the context of philosophy, which is a cool project. And there are a few things that I think that we probably can hit on tonight. Oh, well, actually, no, it was for our previous subject, not optimism. When we were going to talk about judgment, one of your subjects is clarity. Use that word instead of truth.
Which I discovered after writing the majority of it, it very closely paralleled the word that Gadamer, who I still haven't read, independently came to, but transparency instead of clarity. So okay. a lot of philosophers in this phenomenology hermeneutics strain seem to keep coming to the exact same words to describe things, which is both frustrating and also very cool.
Yeah, I like clarity better than transparent. Transparency it has a film, it has a transparent feeling to it, right, in a different way. Whereas clarity means like, oh, that makes sense. But anyway, so we have that project going, and I also want to, because I'm a nerd and I create little things all the time. I'm going to throw up our ad for our Greater Mandala. That's another project we've been working on lately. If you haven't joined, the link is in our show notes now for this show. And you have to sign up for our mailing list, and it'll send you a link to our Discord. We started Discord recently. We have a bunch of guys on, 50 or so, including some of the Order of Fire guys who are the first men. And if you want to be part of that discussion that we have on there, actually we've gotten some good ideas already from 4 shows from that, and then we talk about various other things that we're planning and doing, and try to have discussions. I think there are even a few guys talking about doing a reading group for Fire in the Dark, which seemed kind of cool. I told them if they actually do it and make it to the end, I'll do a video QA with them. And I'll do a thing for that. So it's just another way that you can be part of what we're doing and contribute to it. So
would it be fair to say that's the place to go if you have suggestions for what we should be talking about then?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, obviously you can put it in the comments. I see everything. But if you're interested in contributing to the show and saying what you'd like to see us talk about in the future, that would be a great place. Just have to go in, make an introduction, and I'll preview so that you can see more. We have a little bit of an airlock system there because I hear that Discord is full of trolls and Chinese bots and all kinds of things like that. But anyway, this is the thing. I'll put that up right now.
Join us on our Discord, the Greater Mandala. For access, Sign up to the Order of Fire's mailing list.
I have to figure out where that belongs in our program, but we're new at commercials. But I figured that should be in there at some point. I made that the other night. But anyway, let's start talking about optimism. It was interesting. I told Christopher right before we signed on. The guy I live with is sitting out there listening to the State of the Union address, and I walked into the kitchen to get my stuff, and it's like, January 6th was an insurrection, and I'm like, Jesus Christ! I'm like, he's like lying really loud, and like it's funny that dude, Biden, obviously, you know, whatever they've done to him, like to keep him animated or whatever, and his face, most, you know, when they're having a presidential moment, and that's their big moment when they do the State of the Union and say all the wonderful things that they've done that are mostly bullshit and always have been, but but they're trying to look presidential, you know, like even like it doesn't matter if it's Trump or Obama or whatever. We're like, and people, here's what we've done, and they're trying to be inspiring, whatever. But his face can't do that anymore because of the Botox and because of like whatever reanimating drugs they have him on or whatever. So he just looks angry. Whenever he's trying to make a forceful point, he's like, the January 6th, it's like your old grandpa, your crazy old grandpa is trying to make a point, and he's angry. Even when he's saying something he's passionate about, like he's supposed to be like we're gonna help these women get in like IVF. You know,
does he also still do the creepy suggestive whisper at times?
I don't know. He was just saying like he was screaming when I was in there. It was like he was screaming, and literally one half of the room was standing up, and the rest of the room was like it wasn't. It was like no, there was nothing going on. But it's an interesting thing to talk about. The context of it is like, well, how do you say? Like you said before we started, you know, there's a question with optimism because it's better to be optimistic most of the time and to function as if things are going to work out. And we can go into some of the reasons why that we'll skip that, you know, in a minute. But generally speaking, it's better to behave optimistically in the world until it's not. But it's hard, obviously. It's like, well, the president of the country that I'm supposed to be living in and care about is literally lying, like right, like we know he's lying. Like half the country knows he's lying, and he's like that. That's not a great cause for optimism. That's not like Kennedy saying we're going to go to the moon. That's like you're lying and calling us all traitors. like that's how do you stay optimistic in that kind of environment? And that's a struggle I think that personally, I mean, I've had since the great unfortunateness of 2020 and forward. I think, I mean, I foresaw some things. I mean, you can look at The Way of Men, and I was seeing things for a long time, things that a lot of people didn't pick up until a lot later. But, you know, there was a lot more sense, I think, of like, we can really turn this thing around, or, you know, that, you know, there was more futures than the you know, the windows are closing on certain things, I think. But on the other hand, we don't know what's going to happen either. So what it has made is, I think, for me, and this is just me, but it has made it more difficult to plan more than a couple years ahead. Like, I don't feel comfortable making a 5-year plan. Like, I feel comfortable making a 1-year plan, then we'll see where we're at. We'll readjust from there. Yeah, you know, like, but you have to stay optimistic where like you're paralyzed. Like, you really can't do anything. You have to have a certain level of optimism for the future, or at least the near future, to operate.
Right.
I mean, that's pessimism is paralyzing, and to a certain, it's like you can. It also leads to nihilism and hedonism.
Right.
The bad end of it is basically like, well, nothing really matters. It's all going out. I mean, like if I really thought we only had 6 months, I might as well just get drunk. I might as well just get fat and drink Negronis. I'm like, who cares? Like whatever. I mean, that's what you do. I mean, like in those scenarios in which the movies where they say like, an asteroid is coming to the Earth and everyone knows it, and people are like, oh fuck it, let's go to a rave and like whatever. Like people it just goes to hedonism because there's no reason to continue. Really, if everything's just going to be obliterated, then but obviously then the other aspect of it is, and my message for people is often my message for myself. And that's how it's, it's sincere. Like the whole invocation of the storm thing. It's like, well, now's the only time we have. So like, if you're going to do something, you have to do it now. So like that's the best I could give. That's like like from where I'm at. It's like this is the only time we have it. Like things have always been uncertain. Things have always been bad. There's always been potential for bad things to happen, and bad things do happen. But regardless, I mean, this is your shot. Shoot your shot right now, because this is what you get. So I mean, regardless of how you wish things would be, they're not. So you have to make the best of what they are, and just move forward. So,
right. I mean, the State of the Union is an interesting place an interesting springboard for this topic because it captivates so many people. But as with many, I haven't checked the numbers. I'm going to hazard a guess that this is going to be one of the least viewed States of the Union in recent memory. I'm just going to guess. I'll check the numbers later. We'll see if I'm right or not. But my guess is no one cares what Biden is saying, really, except what they can get out of it and what they can clip and embarrass him with later. Because as you were saying before, what they've done to him to keep him alive, and even the left, even the people who vote for him now openly acknowledge this. Like, he is not just metaphorically puppet. He's bordering on literally a puppet, it would not surprise me to see like some like fishing line strings to a harness keeping him upright from falling one more time,
or like an exoskeleton.
It's like so. I mean, this is not my original opinion on politics. I'm borrowing this from Curtis Yarvin. My view, though, of the American state is that the president is not really in charge. Has not really been in charge since FDR. FDR essentially separated the White House from the executive branch. The executive branch does not need the White House to function. It can function completely on its own. And so the president is this sort of like English monarch puppet of the executive branch that exists outside of the voting process. And so like when I have not always been super disciplined about this, but whenever I get into political conversations with people I don't agree with, I try to remember to open the conversation by asking them, like, suppose you got everything you wanted politically. Everything you wanted in policy came to pass. You won. Absolutely. What would you do? Personally? Like, you got everything you wanted politically. Now what would you do with your life? And it's very it cuts through a lot of the BS because it gets straight to the conversations about values. And there's a lot more common ground in that domain than a lot of people imagine. But also, so many of the things that people think that they would do if they got everything that they want are actually very attainable, even if you get none of the political things that you want.
Right.
I mean, there are some restrictions. If you want to like hunt with a suppressor in the wrong state, you'll be limited. It's like, how important is that really in the grand scheme of things? I want to do that, but like, I'm not going to say my life has been wasted because I can't do that. Or if it's that important, I can move to another state. How doable is that? Well, it's very doable, you know? And so like these politicians, I think on the one hand, they have a lot less power over your life as an individual than they command our attention if we let them. And they feel very powerful when we pay lots of attention to them. And this is not to say that, one, you shouldn't pay attention to politics because it can be valuable information, or two, that politics doesn't matter at all. It does. But so much of it is like vicarious concern, you know? Okay. So the cause for optimism, I think, begins by stepping out of that vicarious frame. And the people on the right, and I guess we're kind of like right of center in many ways, but there's also people on the
we're with the sun.
Yeah, we're we're the true. Yeah, yes, but like the people on the right often make fun of the left for taking vicarious offense, or not make fun of. They criticize the left for this vicarious offense taking.
Right.
But there's a similar kind of vicarious concern from the right that happens in terms of like social policies and like, oh, you're keeping these people down. It's like, well, that might be true, but like, and it might be worth trying to combat at some level, but it's not a reason to lose heart personally, you know. And it can be hard to separate your personal feelings from like the welfare of your country, because it's good to love your country and to want the best for it. But at the end of the day, the nation exists for us. You know, we don't exist for the nation, and you can get into some very serious trouble very quickly if you begin inverting those two things. I think this is not true in genuinely fascist states, obviously. There, the individual exists for the nation. But in our constitutional republic, you know, the Constitution says this nation exists for the welfare and posterity of ourselves and our descendants. That's its mission. And so to that end, you know, looking out, beginning with your own welfare and the connections you can make and the things you can do in your life, there's so many positive things you can do. And I was reminded recently, because there's this hilarious video going around of an ATF agent that was just absolutely failing. It was like the most painful, cringeworthy minute I've ever seen on live television, trying to take down what looked like a Glock 17 and just completely failing. He was just struggling for like 30 seconds straight trying to get this thing apart. And then these two other people are just standing next to him, awkwardly watching him. And he's the so-called expert who's about to discuss these weapons. He just cannot for the life of him take this Glock apart. And it reminded me of that Jordan Peterson research study where one of his grad students, it wasn't him, but one of his grad students was doing research on the correlation between politics and political affiliation, particularly as it pertains to censorship, and verbal intelligence. And not only is there a strong connection between low verbal intelligence and the desire to censor other people's speech, that correlation is actually higher than the correlation between low verbal intelligence and low grades in school. So being not very good with language and with words more strongly predicts your desire to censor other people than it predicts how you'll do in school. So it's always useful to remember, like, a lot of these people find their way into, you know, bureaucratic positions of power because they are very attracted to the idea of controlling other people. But then they wield a lot of power, and the institution as an emergent entity has what you might call a degree of intelligence or competence. But individually, they're not that bright. And it is actually very easy in discrete instances for someone like a Trump or an Elon Musk or a Schallenberger or these types of intelligent individuals to just wrap these people up in knots. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to win every fight, but it's a lot closer of a fight than it sometimes feels within the domain of politics. But also, these things never hold forever. It's no victory is absolute, no defeat is final, or however the saying goes. These fights, we're going to have to fight again in a generation, regardless of whether we win or lose. And so we may as well lean into the participation in history that didn't end. Maybe we can hunt for a better, more competent opponent than Biden, because that's not going to make you a very competent person if that's your competition.
Well,
we can find some more. Who's the Democrat organizers? Someone like a Podesta or a Soros. That's a more serious opponent. Let's figure out how to play a game of chess with those types of people.
well, I mean, they're already doing that.
Well, they're doing it. How serious is the opposition to that? Now we're beginning to see that. We're beginning to see organized campaigns to kick out Soros DAs.
Yeah,
that's a serious chess game, and it's challenging and engaging to participate in and pay attention to, and I think there's cause to enjoy the challenge in predicting as well as engaging with that.
interesting. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, as you said, I don't know what the numbers will be on the viewership of something like the State of the Union today, but I mean, had it not been on in my house, the chances of me actually sitting down to watch it are about actually probably even less, and this is saying something, than me sitting down to watch the Oscars. Like that. These are two things that I would only expect to be insulted by watching, and that from which I derive absolutely no pleasure or value, and only am going to sit and shake my hand at the TV like an old man. So that none of those things are really interesting. But a man once said to me many years ago, it was a frequent thing he said, is that if you can't influence the president of the United States to change the color of his tie, then you probably shouldn't talk so much about him. And his catchphrase was that politics is social gossip, basically. And there is a lot of truth to that as well. I mean, the amount of influence you or I actually have on anything actually going on is extremely minimal.
Right.
So we can be mad about it. We can be mad about things that are going on. Or we can just deal with what's happening.
Exactly. And the frame that Curtis Yarvin, who I'll defer to again, uses says, I don't know if he puts it in these terms exactly, but my interpretation is the high agency way to approach politics is to approach it without the delusion that you have any kind of influence or control. Now that sounds like a low agency view, but it actually clarifies what your domain of action actually is. So if I see certain policies coming down the pipeline in Washington State, for example, and I say, okay, this is a problem, but it's like, it'll probably go away from some Supreme Court rulings or whatever. That's fine. Or if I see some policies coming down the pipeline that I'm like, this would actually threaten like my children in some meaningful way down the road, I'm going to move to Idaho or Montana. That's a high agency approach. If I imagine that I can defeat these things by fighting it, and I can, well, then it's good to participate and to fight it. Yeah. But if I imagine I can influence those things and I'm offered a kind of placebo experience of participation, like hitting the crosswalk button to cross the street in New York, and it just makes you feel better and it'll change on its own algorithmic timing. That's not high agency. So the frame that Curtis Yarvin advances is, imagine you're living in another country like Argentina or Cuba. You pay attention to politics the way you pay attention to the weather report. You have no illusion that you're going to stop the thunderstorm. But if you see a thunderstorm changing, you might decide not to go for a hike that day, Yeah. And it's I think at a grander level, if a lot of people stopped pretending that they had some kind of influence in the system, it would actually end a lot of the incitements to outrage, because so much of politics seems to be goading people into this kind of masturbatory pseudo action, which is useful to some people, but a lot less useful to you.
Right. And actually, this is a good time, based on what you just said, to introduce my operation that I'm going to put out there for members of the Order of Fire and people who I like. Suggest this as an operation for the fall. I haven't set a date for when the operation starts yet, or what the distraction will be. But the operation is tentatively called Operation Hysterectomy, because we know, because we're watching the weather, we know that something ridiculous is going to happen, and it's going to make a lot of people mad. I would say somewhere between like August and December.
Whoa. You're not suggesting some kind of outrage or scandal will drop in October of an election year, are you?
I know it seems crazy, but okay. I know it seems insane. But
I'm skeptical.
I've consulted many healing crystals and crystal balls, and I've done talk to Ouija boards and things, and through my many such sources that are reliable, I have determined that there will be some shenanigans, some very severe shenanigans, the likes of which we have not seen for a long time. And the word you used when it's incitement, I think, and that's what I've been saying to people is like, well, through 2020, we got to have our feelings and have our emotions out and whatever, and lose our minds and become hysterical, basically, about like things that were going on, myself included. I had to pull myself off of Facebook because I was commenting on the governor's profile every day. We all did that. Most of us did it. And now we know we've had that introduction to that, because we had an experience that none of us have had in our lifetimes. And now we know that that's coming down the pipeline again. So maybe we can make some different choices about how we handle that. And my thought for the op was that we pick something completely inane to be obsessed with, and just direct all of our content in that general direction at a troll level. Like, the first thing that came to mind was baking bread. But like, and that doesn't have to be the thing. It doesn't really seem on brand. I have to think of something better. But just because it's so inane, like, oh my God, I am so into baking bread right now. And like every day posting things about bread when everybody else is losing their minds, because they will be, and saying things that they won't be able to take back, and incriminating themselves. And the thing is that whatever happens during that period, it's your perception of it is going to be wrong.
Can I throw in a throwback to a previous podcast or stream we did on hatred? We were talking about hot hatred versus cold hatred.
Yes.
And I was digging through the passage. I wrote, like disgust and like anger, there is a face for hatred, but that face is not the rage of anger or the grimace of disgust, nor is it the asymmetric smile of contempt or the glower of ordinary resentment. The face of deepest hatred is totally blank and expressionless. And it's also the highest agency form of hatred. So if you feel in your heart hatred for someone, and I have no idea why you would feel that way, but if you did, hypothetically, it's good to remind yourself the best expression of that, if you're serious about that emotion, you're not going to be telegraphing anything. Don't give away anything about yourself that you wouldn't want your enemies and people who hold you in contempt to know.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on the other side of some period of that reservation and of that non-interaction, that not telegraphing your feelings or intentions to that person, you might discover they have way less of an impact on your life than you thought they did. And that it was all about that engagement in the first place. But so long as you're wrapped up in that feeling of hatred, remember the sort of allegory of the bull that doesn't immediately charge at the matador's cape, because so much, and this is a point that Curtis Yarvin also brings up when he talks about the importance of not falling into the caricatures, into the categories that they pre-build for you. There's a very, very dangerous attitude that people have out there of, you should do the opposite of what the government tells you. And that is extremely dangerous for a number of reasons, for epistemological reasons, because there's like more than one opposite of a view. So they say don't eat eggs, and you're like, I'm going to eat 12 dozen eggs. It's like, okay, eggs are good, but like you can overdo something. And but also if you lean into their caricature, you're very often more valuable to them in creating a target than even their own supporters. If you lean into being a Nazi, for example, or like the stereotypical, if you lean into being a integralist Christian nationalist in the current cycle, you are giving them ammunition. Like, oh, the dumbest comment out there is like, receiving flak means you're over the target. No, it doesn't. It means you've walked into their kill box and now they're in a feeding frenzy. And don't walk into their kill box. Don't inhabit their caricature. But it can be tempting to swing the opposite way, which is why it's important to maintain a degree of cold detachment from these people that are trying to psych you up in one direction or the other. Either direction is advantageous.
I mean, there's a lot of different caricatures that you could inhabit, certainly, that they have out there right now. I mean, they're telling you what they are. In fact, I'm guaranteeing that speech, as you mentioned, I think earlier from Scott Adams, there are some code words that they're telling you that are going to be in that speech of what they're looking for and who they want you to become. And that's obvious. And that the thing is, it's like, when the things happen, a lot of people will say those words and do the things. And and the thing is, what we have learned, if you've learned anything about following the news cycle, is that whatever you think is happening that day is not really what happened.
And also was known probably 3 or 4 months in advance, if not longer.
Yeah, well, sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, like, earthquakes happening. Like there are things that just happen in the world, but there's going to be a huge spin of information that comes out and a lot of conjecture. We see this every time there's a shooting, every time there's a big thing. There's all kinds of conjecture, and it's usually what comes out about it later is usually wrong or different. Or whatever. And so like your stupid opinions that you're going to say at that moment are wrong. So just sit on your hands for a little bit, bake some bread, do some, that's what I said, like a counter message by doing something that's inane. And then it doesn't mean that you don't have hate in your heart for what's going on. But like you said, that cold hatred is a bitter aspect. I think someone mentioned in the comments of that video that I talked about Fedor with that, and I actually dropped a video of Fedor for one of Fedor's entrances in the comments to that hate thing. You want to have the Fedor look to this whole thing rather than the like, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. I mean,
Yeah.
there are people who are paid to do that. That's their job. They're pundits.
Yeah.
And but all their on X they call them their reply guys. You don't
Right.
need to be there. You don't need to be their like insurrectionist reply guy. That's that's not going to help you. It doesn't help your family. It doesn't help anything that's going on. It's just really like giving them what they want.
Exactly. And like while we're talking fighters, the other example that comes to mind is Bruce Lee. Be like water. Be this adaptive thing. And to carry on with the like weather metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
If your cause for optimism is hope in the ability to control the weather, as is the case with certain factions of the left, like you're going to inevitably become a pessimist because you're going to realize you have no control over this. Yeah. But if you find your cause for optimism not in controlling like chaotic systems like clouds, but in your ability to think through how can I build a functional shelter for this or predict things, there's a ton of cause for optimism. And like all these horrible things going on in the world, like I think the thing about like the Biden administration, the fact that we're talking about the October surprise 6 months in advance, it's like it's almost boring. How predictable these things are. And there's I think the optimism is found in the feeling of agency. Mm-hmm. People get depressed and pessimistic when they feel like they lack agency. And so people get too attached to the idea that all ability to do things is tied up in the state, and then they discover they have no control over the state. Well, they're going to lose their minds.
Well, and part of the American myth, though, and I mean, which felt more true at one point, but part of the whole American thing is that you're supposed to have agency in the state. that was kind of a new thing that they came up with, aside from Athens and all that. But like it was kind of new that we were supposed to get a say in how things go down. So that's why Americans are so. I mean, it drives a lot of their commentary, even in the way that they interact with, like say, famous people or whatever. Americans believe in their heart of hearts that their opinion matters on any subject at any time, and that they should be listened to. And if you don't listen to them, you're a bad person. And basically, and you can see this in the way that people don't like to have their accounts blocked for commenting on shit, and like they want to insult you all day long because they think it's their natural God-given right to insult anyone at any time all day long. And I mean, my take on that is always like, you are free to do that on the internet elsewhere, but not in my space. Fuck off. You are now out of my life. Goodbye.
People get so mad when you block them too.
I know. They get so mad because they feel like they have a right
to
speak to you. And I'm like, no, that doesn't exist in any like real life scenario. Like you don't get to just like corral me in like in the grocery store and like call me names for fucking like no, we're not doing that.
Or if you do, I reserve the right to practice this BJJ takedown I've been really working on the last.
Yeah, exactly, or something. I mean, I'm probably not going to try and catch a charge, but security, like somebody it's I think there's no reason you would put up with that in any other space. And so, but people get mad because I think it's a very American thing more than let's say European or whatever. Americans feel that they should be heard all the time and that their opinion does matter. And, and so it's really hard to break them of that. It's a hard sell, for a lot of people.
Right. And that's why I try to, one of the reasons I try to begin these political disagreement conversations with the what if you got everything you want hypothetical, because presumably these people doing what they want after they get everything they want wouldn't require them to tell everybody else, except insofar as they're trying to connect with like-minded people, which you can clearly do right now. And it is funny when it becomes apparent that these people, their dream is participation in the political process, and they have no goals outside of that. But that's like very obviously not a good look, and no one wants to admit to that. But like, as far as like agency in speech and representation in the government and so forth, I mean, a lot of that is kind of backwards thinking. Like, once you adopt a mature view of how government actually works, like it still operates in the private sector largely. It's just not voters, it's like Raytheon and whoever else. Right. I was watching a National Geographic documentary with Mariana von Zeller, about hitmen and their lives and their function. And a part of her exploration of this took her to South Africa. And what surprised me was that apparently over 50% of the hits taken out, because South Africa is one of the assassination capitals of the world, they're all related to the taxi business, more so than politics by a fair margin. And I was like, taxi? Why taxi? Well, it's because that's where the money is. These taxi magnates, like 70% of people apparently in South Africa get around by taxis. So the people who run the taxi companies make a lot of money, and they have territory wars, like Crips and Bloods in the United States, and right. Like the competing cartels in South America and Mexico. And so like power can accumulate in very strange places, and so violence can accumulate in very strange places. But like the people who think, oh, I need to have say in the government or else things are unfair, it's like, it has always worked that people had influence and power and excellence and brought value into the world, whether that's through taxis or some other way, in the private sector, and then influence in the state flows downhill from that. It always began in the private world. I mean, the whole idea of representative governance in the European context, taking out Greece and Rome for a second, really came with the advent of the English longbow. I was going down a fairly deep rabbit hole last week about this. Basically, England was running out of soldiers to fight battles in Europe, and so they passed some laws in the 12th and 13th century requiring all free Englishmen essentially to own weapons. And eventually this became owning bows in particular, and to practice with them and to train with them. And these were military weapons. These were not just could poke your eye out if you got attacked in the night, but these are like, could take down the flower of French aristocracy and entire male lines of lords and knights on the battlefield with like 10-to-1 killed death ratio. Just brutal weapons of warfare. And so the poor landowning class were called yeomen, and these yeomen became almost etymologically interchangeable with their role on the battlefield. Yeoman archers. Yeoman is almost a byword for archer in some circles. And it was these yeomen who became kind of transformed in mythic narrative into this ideal of Robin Hood, who is this anti-clerical and also anti-aristocratic, despite being an aristocrat, but not anti-royal. Very loyal to the king, loyal to Virgin Mary or Christianity, but not to the clerics. And this ideal of the participating commoner who has notions of justice and fairness and what a fair tax rate looks like, that worked its way into English culture. But it didn't do that just through philosophical axioms. It did it because they brought a lot of value to the table with their longbows. They won battles for their king, and so they got a say at bow point in some cases. So it goes back to that high agency like perspective of what can you do outside of politics, and when you begin there, downstream from 10 to 20 years of doing that, you will have more political say than politicians. You know, they're just intermediaries. They're just like playing a game to try to be the one with the gavel, but they're not really. It doesn't look like they're making decisions meaningfully. It looks like they're just playing a game to try to keep their seat, and you know, their donors and those kinds of people are the ones who are making decisions.
Right. Well, there's a lot of money in between me and agency of that.
Well, sure, yeah.
There's a little more than a longbow, but I mean,
I'll give one example of like what kinds of things these people are fighting over. So I had a family member who worked in an aircraft company, specifically a helicopter flight training company. And there was a law that was in consideration about severely restricting some kind of aviation flight rules that would make training like and entertainment flights for paying passengers like prohibitively expensive with all the fees and stuff they'd have to pay. And so this company, which was run by Republicans, made a fairly sizable donation to the Democratic candidates. And as a result of that donation, and probably a few other things, the law ended up not getting passed. Now, like that's the scale of agency that they're fighting on. You know, I'm not running an aviation a flight school. Right. You know, I like what is required of me to experience agency on the scale that would give me that sense of power and fulfillment. No politics at all. You know, being able to buy some books, maybe a more expensive scope for a rifle I'm trying to take out a little bit further. There are some politicians that want to do away with that, but like not what I'm trying to work on. You know, and we can cross that bridge when they get to, you know, magazine restrictions. There's lots of good people fighting that anyways. I don't need politics at all for what I'm doing. And I think that's true with most people. Now, and again, this is not to say politics doesn't matter or you shouldn't pay attention or anything like that. But when people are looking for agency by trying to find by trying to make sure that the government agrees with them and then getting outraged when it doesn't.
Right.
It feels like you're barking up the wrong tree.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, there's obviously, I mean, I think, like I said, I would have had much more of this view with certain things before the great troubles of 2020. Right. Because that they did actually get in your business. Like they really did, yeah. You know, like quite a bit. I know people whose businesses were shut down, whatever. Like they got in your way of your real life, and
that's
so like
true. Yes,
there's that. You know, like and so like that is a concern. Like that. That's the kind of stuff I'm looking at. I'm not like I don't give a shit about their policy on whatever thing that doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
But more like how much you're going to get in my business is more that my concern. And to take it into a practical level, because we don't want to talk about politics the whole time, because that's not really what this was supposed to be about, right? But to take it to a more practical level, I'll talk about a decision I made recently, based where I had to talk myself into being more optimistic a little bit. And that was, I really needed a new vehicle. It was time, but because of the weather, I'm like, do I really want to be on the hook for anything for 6 years right now? You know, like this is a little bit, but it's, you know, like my other vehicle was paid off. Like, you know, like I'm like, oh, am I going to take on a new $500 payment every month? Going into a very uncertain future. And the thing that I want to get is not fuel efficient. I'm expecting after whatever the foolishness goes down this year that gas prices will probably double next year or very near, because why wouldn't they? And that's, I mean, they're low this year for a reason. but they're I expect them to go back up, so that'll become a burden. And I was doing all this kind of dooming down the road about like, well, what happens for that? And the conclusion that I came to, I was just like, just bet on yourself. Like, oh well, bet on yourself that you're going to figure it out. Like whatever. It's like, like so worried about like, oh, it's going to be like this much payment and whatever. Like, how am I going to make, like whatever. And I've managed to not work for anyone else for the past 10 years and make things happen and make some changes and like, find some new ways to make money. Like I'm not going to die. If worst case scenario, like I find out I can afford it, at some point and I have to do some stuff or sell something or whatever, just stop it. Like basically like, cause I was, and I literally got to the point where I asked ChatGPT, cause if I'm locked into a payment that's $400 a month, but inflation like doubles, then my money will be worth, then my payment would actually be low. Like, I'm like thinking about that. I'm like, all right, that's a positive like way to look at it. My payment will be low because everyone else will be paying $800 a month for the same thing. Or the money is not going to be like worthless. So I'll be locked into a low payment, like the people who bought houses in like 2021 with a low interest rate.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I was like, I guess now's the time. And I talked to my sister this evening. I guess her and her husband came to the same conclusion. They just got a new car because they figured like whatever is going to happen. They're like, if we're going to get in debt, we might as well get in debt now. And
that betting on yourself extends so far beyond just the weather too.
Absolutely.
There are conversations that people have prior to having kids about how like, oh man, I don't know if I'm ready for this.
Right.
How are we going to afford it? Oh my God, kids are so expensive. We're going to, and it's very easy to get very anxious and to believe you can't do it. And, but no one's ready. No one's ever ready,
Yeah.
And you figure it out as you go. And also you were literally designed to do this. You're literally designed to, and if you bet on yourself, one, you'll be right most of the time. Not every time. There are some people who maybe need to figure some things out first, but for the majority of cases, like no one knows how to do this going in. You figure out what works sort of intuitively and by trying things, and also you were designed to do this. How are we going to make it through the future? How are we going to survive this weather? How are we going to survive this climate change, metaphorically or literally, or whatever else. Is like humans have been solving problems with their brains for our entire existence. That's what we do. You mentioned Scott Adams earlier. Scott Adams has this. I've come to enjoy this law the more I've heard it and the more I've thought about it. He calls it the Adams law of slow moving disasters, which is, disasters that catch us off guard can really screw us over. And his take was that COVID was in some ways and kind of a surprise, caught us off guard. He's got his own take on that. But a lot of these other things, like we were supposed to run out of oil like a decade ago. We were supposed to. There all these things.
Like really 30 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, those predictions might actually have been right with the information that they had now.
Right.
But they don't take into account humans' problem-solving capabilities. Oh, we discovered fracking. Oh, fracking creates other problems that could cause huge disasters in 30 years. Well, guess what? 30 years is a lot of time to figure out how to address those problems. And with enough forewarning, and this is the case for following politics and following the news, you can get some information about what's coming. You can resolve a lot of these problems. I moved my family away from the west side of Washington, the sort of Seattle area, back in 2018, 2019. I don't know, it was like 5 years ago. because you kind of see the writing on the wall of like where that was going, and it feels like a better decision with every passing year.
Yeah.
You made the full jump out of the Oregon, which is like even worse, and I wish I'd jumped the state out of Washington, so could have done better, but it's at least out of the bad part.
Yeah. Well, now it's like, well, we see the weather. Now it's like if you see the weather, you want to make the right choice. And that's why it's not, as far as like, not so much as like I can control what's going to happen, but more like, well, and that's really how the big boys play the game anyway. I mean, like,
exactly.
I mean, there for everyone who's like America, there's like a whole bunch of war profiteers that are like, they're like, hey, we can make some money on the butt, and that's, I mean, isn't that how Soros made some of his money or something? I don't know, but people like, well, here's what's actually happening, and how can I capitalize on that and make but you and I are good guys who are trying to be honest and sincere and so forth.
Yeah, you don't need to become a sociopath.
Capitalize on anything, but like if you can see what's happening and start to make intelligent, unemotional choices about what role you're going to play and stuff, and how you're going to set yourself up, or if it matters. And that's kind of like, that's one of the things I took a gamble when I moved to Arizona from Utah, because Arizona wasn't the best choice as far as like the troubles of like what we're going to, and I found out that it wasn't the best choice. I gambled on hoping that something would go a certain way, and it didn't. And so that is what it is now. But, like I could have moved to Texas. Like I thought about Texas. That was probably the smarter choice. But it was ugly. And sorry, Texans. But like I went there and I was not feeling it. I may end up there still, but it is not what I was like, well, I want to live in Arizona. Was basically I made a choice. I'm like, I actually want to live in Arizona. I want in the words of Dune, my path leads into the desert. And like I wanted to go to the desert, that's where I wanted to be. And I'm like, well, maybe things are going to be really gross in 10 years, but for the next 5 years, that's where I want to be. So, yeah.
Right. Well, and talking about weather and the desert and so forth there's another frame for optimism, which has nothing to do with external events and has everything to do with betting on yourself and faith in yourself and confidence in yourself. There are cattle ranchers in the United States who have herds of both regular cattle and also American bison. And these animals will often graze together. And the agricultural method of separating them, so I've been told anyways, is to literally just wait for a storm. When a storm comes, the bison will walk essentially into the storm, and they'll just wait it out. The cattle will like endlessly walk away from the storm clouds and try to move away from the distance. And that can be wise, they're probably less likely to get struck by lightning or something. But the bison, with its confidence in its ability to weather that storm, has a kind of optimism, not in the storm not coming, but in its own ability to endure it, and it brings to mind for me the people in the Eastern Bloc and in Russia who endured, 70 some odd years of communism. And many of them have come out on the other side on something that's like a little bit more reasonable, still probably insanely corrupt, but at least not like, gulags of Stalin. And they endured that. They weathered that. The worst of the worst politically came through and left, and they're still there. They survived. And humans can be very resilient. We can be very fragile if we're very stupid, as some of us are sometimes inclined or incited to be. But if we're smart, we can be extremely resilient. And you can, if you're smart, you can have faith in and pride in and optimism about your own resilience in the face of whatever weather, metaphorical or literal, if you live in Florida, might be coming your way.
Cut and print. Oh no, I was just listening. I'm like, I think it's always hard for me to find out what the reels are out of that, but I think you just got a reel out of that. I'm like, that's a tight little sentiment that like is uplifting that the people will like. But no, I mean it's true. I mean, I would err on the side of being an elderly gentleman. I would prefer not to like bet on making it through 70 years of communism. So I'm trying to move away from that storm. But
be the bison, says Mike Tubis.
Yeah. Being the bison's a young man's game. But although
there's a place for the old bison to sometimes guide the young bison.
Oh, for sure.
As the old saying parable goes.
Yes. That's the old bull. But yes, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, bisons, they have bulls, I guess, probably, yeah.
But relatives,
yeah. But I think there's definitely and we're not necessarily saying things are going to be that bad, but there's just an awareness of things. I think, and you're right. We are, I think the good takeaway is to bet on yourself and to imagine, assume that you can handle it. And that's really what confidence is. It's like, well, you have a track record of success, and therefore you assume that you can handle it. But that is the, I think, question of optimism, is that there is a gray zone between optimism and foolishness. Because, foolishness is like, I think we talked about that in the meaning discussion like a while ago, and it was a different kind of foolishness. But like if you overestimate your capabilities and you overestimate or underestimate the situation and be like, whatever, nothing's happening. You just kind of walk into it all cocksure and like whatever, like, oh, I could handle anything. And you don't like, there's a little bit of foolishness in the way that you like. Perfect example. It's like the cliche of the guy who has never taken any martial arts, but says like, when I see red, I'm going to like that's foolishness. That's confidence. And he believes in himself, and that's very nice, but it's foolishness. And he would get taken to school very quickly by someone who knows what they're doing.
There's also foolishness of that sort in the dating world. Guys with not a lot of experience, trusting, sincerely believing that they are in love with and loved by a woman that all of their friends can see is trouble. It takes experience for them to come down from their idealistic optimism, and then they become misanthropic pessimists.
Right. And obviously,
it wasn't my fault; it was the world.
Right. And there's obviously somewhere in between is where reality is. Like there's that gray area on the other side of like, well, understand how things work a little bit. I feel like so many of the things we talk about come down to the same region of judgment. Like there's like some things are too far, and then sometimes they're like not far enough. But there's a region of judgment that you have to sit in, and that comes with a little wisdom and experience sometimes. Mm-hmm. But also, like a young man can be very certain, and just also not be retarded. Yeah. Just look at the world for what it is. I mean, there's so many people being in the political. Go ahead.
It's awkward to talk about, but there's a kind of wisdom to having a little bit of cocksure foolishness as a young man.
100%. Yeah.
When you can try things and recover from, and when you're in your 30s, you're gonna be like, oh, I cannot believe I said that shit. In my 20s. But the thing is, no one cares. You were young, no one knew who you were, you didn't have a reputation. Now in today's day and age, there are certain contexts where it can come back to haunt you. So you have to be a little more careful. It's not just about not putting your eye out or killing yourself doing something stupid. It's also not about, not killing yourself digitally. But you can still get away with a lot. You can still experiment with a lot of ideas. You can try foolish things. You can like, I'm going to live as a hobo and work my way up. You're 22. It's, you know, it would be worse to just sit in your parents' basement and do nothing. So yeah. Is it smart to do?
I think
no, it's freaking dumb, but do it anyways. And, okay. And you'll learn some things, and you'll gain some of that wisdom, some of that judgment, and then you'll understand why it was a bad decision, but you'll be able to recover. And it's betting on yourself it's like wise for different reasons for young guys. And you're still retarded. Don't get too cocksure, but you know, it's still better to do that than to be too cautious, I think.
Well, they say, I mean, obviously, if you listen to a lot of the entrepreneurs, and some of them are full of shit and some of them aren't, but a lot of the talking head entrepreneurs, you know, they'll throw risk around all over the place. You know, like they'll like, just do it. And, you know, because, you know, they've had experience where they've just done it and it's worked out. Or it's, you know, I've even heard Harmozy, who I think is, you know, the dragon. You know, I mean, even he's like, you know, running business is like getting kicked in the dick every single day. You know, like, and I'm like, that's not probably wrong. You know, there's stuff that goes wrong, but you have to just try to do stuff and throw stuff out there. And you know, there are guys, I mean, me, we one of them, because I was raised fairly conservative when it comes to money. You know, like you start where you just they'll throw like, let's see if we can get like $50,000 and throw it at a problem. And which that sounds like a lot to me and nothing to them. But you know, it's just economy of scale. I mean, it just scales up as you become more comfortable with these things. Like I always say, like when I quit my job and was a tattoo artist in the powerlifting gym, and you know, I was still making money off of books, but you know, like that was where it was most coming from. But I was doing tattoos and stuff like that. I remember ordering my first set of patches to sell, and I was like, "This is $500," and I'm like, oh, that's a lot of, I don't know. And you know, I sold them like right away, like crazy. And I was like, oh, okay. All right. I guess that's not that bad. And now like $500 is like, doesn't bother me that much, you know, but like at the beginning, I was like, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so like
kind of a lot of money, you know?
Yeah, it is. And, but like now it's like, it'd be more like more. And if they don't sell, like, then, you know, like, okay, well, I'll do something else. You know, I have plenty of stuff that I have still sitting in my garage that didn't sell. And but you make a decent amount of money, and that's how you kind of work in your margin, and you just figure it out. And so that's the same with so many of these things. And so like, it's better to, I think this whole episode was actually suggested by Kyle in Canada. We have two Kyles, so I forget which one is Prime and which one is the other one. But snowboarding Kyle, we've actually been reposting him snowboarding a bunch because he's been putting up stuff, and people, if or members of the Order of Fire are doing cool stuff, I'll repost it. And you did a backflip. He did a snowboarding thing. Okay, that's what get posted today. just do cool shit. Yeah, he suggested this and had a lot of interesting things to say about it. And I think most of it was about, you know, one of my takeaways was just how pessimism can lead to inaction and a failure to act constantly. And it can put you in negatives. And it's also self-reinforcing. You know, pessimism is self-reinforcing because, you know, if you don't do anything, you wait too long, and you don't jump on an opportunity, then nothing happened, and I'm in a bad spot, and now my bad spot's worse, and then now I'm afraid to jump on the next opportunity, and it's like it's a negative snowball that goes downhill. Whereas I was talking about this yesterday in terms of competitors. It was really when I was at the powerlifting gym with Chris Duffin, and I had written about this at some point. It was amazing to see someone who's that competitive and doing all this stuff, like just destroying his body because he was trying to set this record. He was trying to lift X amount of weight at this, you know, body weight. So they do all this thing. He's cutting like 20 pounds in a week. like down to like he was talking like he had cancer, like he was just like all the way in for the morning, and then hooks himself up to IVs and like rehydrates himself, almost had a heart attack sitting in the chair, and you watch him go through this whole process. And he was a good friend of mine at that point, and you watch him go through this whole process, and he gets up on stage and does not make the lift. And he's been working on this. He's been telling me about the gym every day for like 4 to 6 months. This is what I'm going to do. He's put his body through like absolute like destruction to do this. Doesn't hit it. And I'm like down on the floor with a camera trying to film this thing. And I'm like, no, I'm like emotionally like destroyed by this. And dude walks off the stage like as he's unwrapping is saying like unwrapping the knee wraps or whatever, as he's saying like, well, what am I going to do for my next training program? And like he was already on to the next thing. Like, and I was like, that is a really valuable lesson. Like because you think that you're going to be like, when that happens, you're going to be like just broken. Like, or at least for a day or two, you think you're just going to be like, oh. And
who also talks that way is Andrew Tate.
For sure.
And people can say all kinds of critical things about him, and many of which will be justified. But the dude also has that mindset. And a lot of these high performance guys do, where they're like, oh, I tried this thing and it didn't work. Cool. What's next? Yeah. Or he tries this thing and it did work and I just made $2 million. Don't sit on your laurels. All right, cool. The neat story. What's next?
Yeah.
Like that was 10 minutes ago. What's next? And like that kind of mindset, pessimism is not just opposed to that. It's almost nonsensical in that view. Yeah. Like there's no space. You're literally too, injected to the point of bursting with agency to even have time to entertain pessimism or optimism for that matter. Yeah, it's like there's room for neither one. It's just the goal and the plan.
Just motion, like forward motion. That's I think that is the way to be going. If you're always busy with things, to be working on projects, and then you just pivot. If something's not working out, you pivot to the next thing. You keep going. And that's, it's easier if you don't, like, if your goal is to just make money or just to be famous, that's a little bit easier than actually having a purpose, than actually having a purpose and things you care about. Because making money, if it's like, well, how else can we make money? Whatever. Or like, like if you have some other kind of goal that you're working on, well, you are confined by that goal. Right. So like you have to find other ways to do that. So there's going to be restrictions there, but it's definitely a sense of forward motion. Do we have any comments in there? I see a bunch of
John Umbrella says it's been interesting to live on one side of the world these days, but also see the news shared on the other side and know that it's mostly fiction. Works to see its effect on people. Control. Yep. Yeah. He's talking about. He's basically describing the experience of that kind of detachment that that Curtis Yarvin was advocating. Like, how would you view politics if you were a foreigner living in a country? And if you're living on the other side of the world, you get that experience. And I imagine it must be very hard watching people get like just sucked into the emotional kabuki drama of it all. But at least you're not. Right.
I know who he is. Like after I saw that, I'm like, oh yeah, I know who that is. Yeah, he's not. Yeah. He's not worried about that for sure.
Yeah. Carlos says, I liken is that our shaman?
Yes.
I liken optimism to magic. If we speak words to what builds and has order, we can create an optimal result. Sometimes, yeah, I think so. Mick Tuba says, I work with guys in OI. I feel like I should know what that is, but I don't. They're also the wealthiest guys I've ever met. There's a lesson in there. And then John Umbrella says, some, though, will wake up and rise, but you have to be willing to do something, not just talk about it. Right. Mike Tuba says, be the Bison, and every is a matter of everything. I assume he means is a matter of balance. Plan for things to fail while also planning for them to not fail.
Which is
High
hard
agency.
to do because you're betting on both sides there. And like if you're betting, you want to all your resources in one direction, you know,
or having contingencies, you know, like there was an event. So the guys who did The Big Short in 2008, there was some big news last year because they took out a giant short on the housing market again. And a lot of people in the finance world were like, oh my gosh, this is big news and we're going to be in for another 2008. But what became clear was that their short was actually a position protection position. It looked like they were creating the short so that if the market went down, they wouldn't lose all their other assets that they had put in. Right. So they were kind of betting both ways, which means they're going to lose either way it goes, but they're also going to win either way it goes. And then John Umbrella says, optimism is having the ability to create. Creating increases your optimism as you see it's a real life skill, especially these days. I feel like that's the center point, the agency. Optimism and agency seem to be strongly connected, and creating is the
well, you have to care about something to create, you know, like you have to want to do a thing, you know, like you have to be, you know, like I'm going to do this thing, and if you literally don't care about anything, you think that everything's like, you know, going to shit tomorrow, you can't create.
Right.
Why would you? It'd be like having like the world's going to end tomorrow, I think I'll have kids. You know, like it'd be like you wouldn't do that, right? So like if you have to believe in some kind of future to create.
Yeah, and Mike Tubis says OI stands for Optimist International. I'd never heard of that before, but if optimists are also the wealthiest guys, that makes a lot of sense, especially if they're in sales. Get that Anthony Robbins kind of vibe going. I'm kidding.
Hopefully. Although he's very rich,
yeah. So those are our comments. I don't know. Is there anything else? Seem to have covered a lot.
Yeah, not particularly. I think we have a lot. I did want to. I could throw out if they have any questions, we can answer them. But next week, it occurred to me that. There will be a big Order of Fire event happening. The guys will be here by the time the show starts, or some of them, not all of them. I mean, they're starting to come in on Thursday night, and then they're going to get more will get here on Friday morning. But I mean, I think at the very least, unless his plane gets like delayed or something, Dustin will be here at my house by that. So I didn't realize that. I didn't think about that until today. But I'm thinking maybe next week we have to figure out how to work that in. And I have to figure out where we're going to set this up, because there should be a bed here, because I have to reset up everything to have 12 guys sleeping on my floor, which is wild. And a dog. Vic's bringing his dog, so nice. And it's a girl dog, so and I think there's going to be a dog rape party. There's going to be some dog drama we'll have to deal with or whatever. But before we go out hiking and do jiu-jitsu and all that kind of stuff, these guys will be here. And so, I think next Thursday, at the very least, Dustin, we've obviously done a podcast with him before. He'll be here. And then the other guys might roll in about in hour or two, I think, because they're I think Ed will be getting in, and a couple other people will be getting in at that time. So, or they'll be getting before that, but by the time Mark gets them here from the airport, I'm a good ways from the airport. So, but that seems like a good. So we'll have to brainstorm as to what we could talk about that we could include them.
Nice. Well, Dustin's got an essay in the book, and Ed's got his essay on Guy, and also the essay that we wrote together on shooting an agency, which dovetails in with our subject today.
That's true.
We'll probably talk about the book together, because it's not just one essay. It's like a whole bunch of stuff with lyrics and poetry and a bunch of essays. I thought I feel like your Apollo essay is going to make some rounds, because Camille Paglia and Nietzsche are so foundational to most people's understanding of Apollo these days. And
he's a little bit more than that.
Yeah, I think I'll probably make a short video on it because most people aren't going to read it. Like they're not going to get the book and read it, whatever. And I don't want to post it online because then why would they buy the book?
Congratulations in advance, by the way, to the 4 people who read my solar phenomenology. You did good work in advance, working through all of that.
Now, there's definitely some good takeaways there. We just didn't need to have like ChatGPT summarize it first. But, no, I mean, like the clarity point and a couple other things that I thought that I think will be things that we use in the order in the future. I think well, not this, but this, because we talked about that. Like Chris talked about that in his essay, and that made sense. So, I mean, there'll be a few points like that, I think, that we'll have to tease out and make part of the thing. But yeah, so like I said, the book will be coming out. I do think the Apollo essay, I'll probably make a short little reel or a YouTube speech or something about that, because it's a good story, like between the mask and what it's about. And I think it has especially for guys who are a little older, I think it has a kind of powerful meaning to it. So that's as much as I can tease it without giving it away. But I think it'll be good. So there'll be some good stuff in there in the book. As we said, the book right now is on Amazon. It's at $98, just because the bots are fighting with each other, or whatever happens in the magical world of Amazon. But
it's probably got some like AI bidding system for slots or whatever.
Yeah. Or they're trying to see like how many we order and whether or not they're worth, whether it's not worth them sitting on a few, or they've been trying to encourage. They've been trying to encourage people to take returns again, which is how the old book industry worked. And I'm not going to do that ever. So that if that becomes a hinge, which I've never had to deal with, because the Amazon always would just buy 20, 30, 40 of my books at a time and then sit on them and send them out because they sold well. If that's not to be the case with this, then I can duplicate it on KDP, and they'll, as long as the content's the same, the ISBN can be the same, and so it'll be for sale through both, and that's
cool.
And they'll put it out right away when it's on their platform, even though they own the other one too. It's so retarded, but it is what it is.
Before we close out, Carlos asks, what would you guys think is the difference between optimism and positivity? That's an interesting one.
I will say, as far as optimism and positivity, I used to say something.
One's like an affect and the other one is a belief. So the guy who jumps to my mind is like a sort of Jim Carrey character who believes it's all going to hell and is also all smiles and like none of it matters. Like kinda, yeah. Like whereas you've got a lot of very serious people out in the world who seem kind of dour on the surface and who seem very I guess I'm just highlighting what he's implying in the question, which is that the two are different, and you can be positive and optimistic, or positive and pessimistic, and vice versa. I mean, yeah, I guess one's an affect and one's an outlook, right?
Maybe. I mean, I'd have to word nerd it and look that up and see what the roots are and whatever. But because someone was making an argument the other day, and I'm not going to call them out because I like them. But it was like you're making an argument about a feeling about a word, and like feelings about words, like I don't really hold water with me. Like if you like, we can look that up. Like let's see what it actually means. But yeah, and the thing this is my feeling about that word now that I've just said that. But one of the things I remember having an argument many years ago where someone said that they actually made it a philosophical position about being an optimist, that they had like they were a committed optimist or something like that. And I'm like, that is, you are no longer a rational person. At that point, like you're like, if you've made a commitment that you're always going to take the optimistic side of everything,
you're about what?
Yeah. If you're like always, if you like, you're actually and that's the danger of optimism
You
or
know what that sounds
positivity.
like? That
Yeah,
sounds like Hegelianism.
Maybe, I don't know. It was not phrased that way. It was something else. But it just sounded like nonsense talk to me because I'm like, well, you've already determined what you're going to believe before you looked at the evidence, so therefore
Yeah.
you're no longer a rational person. Like it's one of those things. Like if there's a tornado coming and you choose to be optimistic about it, that's probably not. That's not. You're no longer a rational person. So it's one of those things like
I wonder if he is taking the opposite position of like a Schopenhauer, because I'm just remembering now that there is such thing as philosophical pessimism, which is essentially the view that life is not worth living,
right.
and life is like a mistake. Yeah. So like philosophical, maybe if someone's talking about philosophical optimism, they're just negating that, which feels like cool. Welcome to the club. There's a lot more going on. Like you've passed the minimum threshold to continue to live. Good start.
Good job. But yeah, 100%.
It's good. It's good. But like, there's more beliefs we're entertaining here.
Yeah. You can't just be like, I'm going to be committed to being 100% positive or optimistic. Like I said, the difference, it's really one of connotation and tone, I think, depends on, and like I said, I'd have to look it up as to the way they're used. I mean, I think, optimism is just a little bit more specific, maybe. Positive could be a lot of things, but optimism is very specifically about what we're talking about. It's like if you've chosen the outcome, it's like then you become like a feminist anthropologist or anyone else who's like, or like literally anyone talking about biblical stuff. Like you've already chosen what the answer is going to be before you started. So therefore, you are no longer doing a like inquiry. You're just like you've literally put blinders on, and that's one of the things that's dangerous about optimism. If you go too far with it, if you put blinders on as to the dangers and things that are going around you, then you're now taking a dangerous position. Like it's
gone from optimism to foolishness.
Exactly. So cool. But I think that's a good time. We wrap up for that. And I will try to get the audio version about this out before the next podcast, that's what I did. Great. I literally released the audio version of the last podcast like before we sat down. Nice. It's just another little piece of work to do. But anyway, thank you all for watching. I almost said tuning in, and then I realized I'd said tuning in earlier today, and no one tunes into anything. We're not. That's like for old TVs when you're like tune in to find the channel.
That's what you do for the State of the Union.
Yeah, pretty much. When you're a boomer and you have to adjust your rabbit ears to listen to it.
Yeah.
But thank you all for watching and participating in the show. It's nice that we have a group of guys who check in and comment now. That's really cool. Like I said, I've been working on a new website. There's nothing new on it, but aside from the store. What we're doing with the Order of Fire right now is we'll eventually have some products, maybe even a shirt for that Apollo essay. I've been just trying to get to there, but we'll be putting out some new merch and some things this next year. And if you look probably on the bottom of this YouTube screen, since I literally spent hours and hours and hours setting up a new system so we could have that. There should be some links to our store. So instead of buying it through my old Start the World store or Brutal Company, now things go right through the Order. So in the big picture, it's important for spreading solar idealism is that's all in one thing and not attached to my old stuff. So that's the plan. I've been working on that. So it's at orderoffire.com, which is a lot easier to remember than PH2T3R. For people, it'll be easier, I think, for a lot of people to find, and then it'll have all of our news and links to things. There may even be things that you don't know about there. I mean, like there's links to the audio versions of this podcast, to the Order of Fire playlist on Spotify, which is whatever I'm listening to, and then a couple other things that we've done over the years. But it's basically my playlist. And we'll keep putting things there that we're doing that maybe you don't hear about in other places. So thanks again for tuning in. Thanks, Mr. Robertson, for joining me as my co-host as always. And hopefully next week we might even have a couple other members of the order with us. And again, if you haven't signed up for the Discord yet, there's a link in the show notes. Jump in there, and then feel free to jump in and just ask questions like you're doing in the chat, and I'll try to answer them. And other members of the Order of Fire or First Men will try to answer them and stuff like that, because we want to really create a bigger community there with the Greater Mandala. So that's the whole idea for that. But anyway, thanks guys. Thank you, Chris, and stay solar.
Pater is the cultural arm of the Order of Fire. For more, visit PH2T3R.com.